Okay, so we are now live. Let's
I'm
just
not
jump
able to
on.
hear anything from Austin. Okay.
How's audio testing? Testing, testing, testing.
Okay. Sorry if anyone's here, but I can't hear Austin right now, so we're just trying to get this to work.
Yep. Hey, I see people jumping on, so let's we'll give it a few minutes. Let us know in the chat if you guys are able to hear us, by the way.
Just having
Can
a
you hear
few
me?
technical difficulties here, trying to get Austin's mic to work, so we'll just, if you guys could be patient, that'd be great.
Hello, hello.
Oh, they can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, they can hear us both. I can't hear you, but...
Okay. So sorry, give us a second, guys. We're going to jump on Instagram Live as well. And we're ready to rock and roll. Awesome. So we're on Instagram Live now as well, on Facebook Live. Okay, so I guess we can, see people joining in. Nice. Sorry, guys, some technical difficulties. Give us another minute or so as we figure this out. Sorry, give me a minute.
Hey, I got you on the phone.
Okay, so maybe we should just rock and roll now. When I stop talking, I'm passing it over to you.
sounds like a plan.
Okay, there you go. Awesome.
All right.
I know that's, with the first one, there's always some hiccups along the way, but I appreciate you guys bearing with us. For those of you guys who don't know, we're hosting this monthly Q&A, bringing in an expert and asking them any questions regarding their expertise topic. And in this case today, we have Kellan James. He's a multifamily expert with 88 units, over $15 million assets under management, and has not used any joint venture partnerships whatsoever. So he ended up scaling his portfolio with his own money. My name is Austin. I'm going to be the host for tonight. And without further ado, we're going to have Kellan start off with a presentation. And then after the presentation is done. Oh, we're good? Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. We're going to make sure that you're live streaming as well on your Instagram, by the way, Kellan.
Yes, it's all good.
Perfect. So we're going to jump off into a presentation with Kellan. He's going to go over his journey. He's going to go over some good tips about multifamily property. And if you guys have any questions, make sure to drop it down in the chat. We'll make sure to monitor it throughout the night. And we're going to switch over to the presentation view.
Perfect.
And we are good to go. So Kellan, going to pass over the mic to you.
Awesome. Sounds good. Appreciate it, Austin. And thank you guys for your patience on that. So I'm going to do a bit of a, let's see, I don't know if the present, there we go. Okay, perfect. Go. So I'm going to try to keep it relatively short because I generally, the way these things go, there's lots of questions at the end. So I'm going to try to fly through the presentation and then we'll jump into Q&A. But just a quick presentation on scaling a multifamily portfolio. My goal is always to provide real strategic, tactical information and using some real actual case studies. And so let's dive into it. If I can get to the next slide, I might need your help with that. Perfect. So my name is Kellan James. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm a long-term multifamily investor here I'm in Ontario, Canada. I have a $15 million portfolio of 88 units, and I have no partners at all. It's just myself, solely owned. And I actually quit my job back when I was 29. I'm 34 now, and I basically shortly after quitting my job, I had 32 units at the time, and we left shortly after. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and we left on a van trip, and we lived in our Dodge Sprinter van for 3 months together and traveled around the US, and kind of got back to Canada and went, okay, well, it's Monday and I don't have a job now, and what's the plan? So I decided to continue scaling my real estate portfolio because I really enjoyed what I was doing when it came to that. And so I just continued scaling it from there. And then at some point along the lines, I started, coaching and mentoring other people to do the same kind of thing and build their portfolios of their own. And it's actually pretty neat because I've seen a bunch of my current and previous students now since quit their jobs and stuff and build portfolios of their own, which has been really neat to see. So that's a bit about myself, and I document most of my journey on Instagram. Let's see if I can jump to that next slide. So this is my journey from 0 to 88 units, and it was a 7-year journey in order to get there. So property number 1, I bought in 2016, and at the time I was renting. If anyone's from London, I was living on Talbot Street in London, and I just worked in the tech world. So I was walking to work every day. I sold my car when I moved to London, and I just walked to work every day and saved every penny I could. And after, I think it was about, so 2012 I graduated. So 4 years or so later, I'd saved up 120 grand just by working. I made like 50 grand at my day job, and towards the end, I made 80,000 at the most in my day job before I eventually left. And I was just saving. I had 120 grand saved up, and I decided to get my first duplex. I did that with 5% down, luckily, because I had a mentor at the time, Matt McKeever, a lot of you probably know, and he really urged me to continue up with acquisition momentum, which was drilled into my brain, and I continue to drill it into other people's, because if you just spend all your money, you can't buy any more real estate. So it's always about getting your money back out of deals in order to continue scaling your portfolio from there. And that's what BRRRR-ing is all about. And I think a lot of people forget that part of the process, getting your money back out so you can keep up momentum. So that first property was 2016, and 5% down. I lived in one half, rented the other, and then moved on to property number 2 very shortly after, another duplex, and I got a really great deal on it. It ended up being my first perfect BRRRR. I got all my money out, and I got more out, and so that allowed me to really continue scaling from there, because that first one was only 5% down, and the next one I got all my money and more, so I really had enough momentum to buy properties 3 and 4, and I continued to do that same type of strategy. I applied things like the Purchase Plus Improvements mortgage, which I'll dive into a bit here. All sorts of different strategies in order to get my money back out of every deal. And I just once I found a strategy that worked, I just rinse and repeat it. And I think that's really the key to success in any field, is just find something that you know how to do, learn how to scale it. And then, so that's what I kept doing. And, a lot of people were getting into all sorts of other things. And I was like, the BRRRR-ing's working. I'm just going to keep doing this. And, by 2019, I quit my job. I had 32 units at the time. And then I continued to scale from there. And I self-managed until I had 52 units. And then I brought on management. And at this point, I have 88 units. And this is sort of the breakdown of my portfolio here. And you can see it takes time. You don't buy all this stuff at once. You get a couple, 1 or 2 properties a year kind of thing, and it can continue to scale from there. So you can see at some point along the lines, I switched into larger multifamily as well. So you can see, say around 2020 actually is when I started getting to 6 units, 8 units, a 24 unit, that sort of stuff. And that is tough to do with no partners, but I'll get more into that. And so opportunity overload is what everyone tends to deal with in this real estate space. This is just in the real estate space. There's BRRRR-ing, flipping, long-term buy and hold, single family, multifamily, commercial. You can get, even in the commercial space, there's apartments, there's mixed use, there's conversions, adding units, short-term rentals, Airbnb, wholesaling. The list is ridiculous. There's so much you can do. And, especially on social media, you tend to see quite a lot of people doing all sorts of different things, and it tends to be quite a distraction, honestly. I dove into all of these things. I didn't do them, but I dove into them to see if they were going to be a good fit for me. And really, it was all about maintaining focus. I decided none of that was for me. I'm going to focus on one of these things, which is just long-term buy and hold with multifamily apartments. And that was my niche, which I actually never really thought of as a niche at all. I thought that was sort of, that makes sense, right? You're going to scale up a portfolio. Well, why not buy properties yourself and do it with, multifamily buildings? And it turned out to be quite a niche these days. There's a lot of people doing all sorts of other things, but I really have a lot of belief in this strategy over the long term. And so it's always important to start with your why if you're reverse engineering your goals. So if you don't have a good reason to do something, then there's no reason to try to figure out why, or sorry, how to do that thing if you don't know why you're doing it. And so, if you're trying to adopt a certain diet or something like that, what's the point in trying to figure out how to do that? You first got to figure out if this is even for you. And so it's really important to figure out why real estate investing is something that fits into your lifestyle and into your goals. And then once you understand that why, you're a lot clearer on why you want to then figure out how to do it from there. And so say your goal is $4,000 a month of passive income, or more. What does that look like? So for example, maybe that's $200 a unit of cash flow. Maybe you need a 20 unit portfolio, or maybe you're looking at a portfolio like these days where it's zero cash flow with interest rates where they're at. Tends to be quite difficult to get properties with significant cash flow at current rates, and that's okay. So maybe in that scenario, you're focused a little bit more on assets under management. So you're trying to really build a large portfolio with significant mortgage pay down, long-term appreciation, and forced appreciation, which is the most important thing. And then to decide whether you're going to have actively managed or you're going to bring on property management to do it for you. And so forced appreciation versus market appreciation, this is something people don't make enough of a distinction about. And it's really all about forced appreciation because this is the only thing we have control over. And not just in the real estate space, but in the real estate space, we need to focus on what we have control over. There's no point in spending time thinking about the things we can't control. And that's one of the basis of Stoicism, if you guys are into that stuff, and Ryan Holiday's books. But it definitely applies to real estate. Short-term market appreciation, if you're looking at 1 to 3 years, we have no idea if market's going to go up, market's going to go down. In the market that we've seen recently, that's definitely the case. We haven't seen it going up this last while a lot, at least in Ontario. It's been a bit of a different case out west. But we are looking to figure out how we can force appreciation. So that's something that's predictable. We have control over it. And we know that maybe short-term market appreciation happens anyway, but we do have a lot of confidence that long-term market appreciation is basically inevitable. And that's largely going to be driven by inflation, governments printing more money and assets going up in value, dollar value going down. This is the reason why we don't want to just have cash sitting in the bank. And real estate is one of those things that over the long term, I don't think very many people doubt. If you own a building now, what it's going to be worth 20 years from now is probably going to be quite a bit more. And it's going to go up in value faster than your cash sitting in the bank will, and especially when it's leveraged 5 times like you would if you had 20% down payment on a property. And so there are joint venture partnerships. Some people go about that. I've still not done a single joint venture partnership in any of my deals, but it is definitely a strategy people can take on if they'd like. The advantage of it is that you have unlimited money, and the main reason why is you're using none of your own money. The passive partner allows easy financing with lenders and like Scotiabank, TD, whatever it might be. And then the active partner has no need to qualify with T4 income or require 1 month of self-employment history or anything like that. And so there are a lot of advantages to that type of structure. That being said, over the last 7 years that I've been investing, very few people have really hung on to any of these joint venture partnered deals. They really tend to not hang on to them very long. They tend to sell them off or break up the partnership somewhere along the lines. And that was always a bit of a concern of mine over the years. And it's definitely turned out to be the case for quite a few people. There's a lot of people I know that scaled portfolios with joint venture partners. And at some point they decided to sell off a lot of the partnered deals and move on to solely owned things. So why not just start solely owned and learn how the financing game works and learn how to keep up acquisition of your own money? So the cons to active passive JV partnerships, 50% of the equity, 50% of the cash flow. You have a new relationship to manage. You have less control over the deal, depending on the terms of your joint venture partnership structure. Holding, selling, refinancing, renovating, all these things you need to run by your partner. An ideal partner is going to be someone that just 100% trusts you, and it's definitely possible to find people like that. But you need to know that people are completely trusting of all of your decisions, and they're just happy to sit back and you do all of the work and make all of the money. And at the end of the day, you guys split it. But you do have to bear in mind that you're doing twice the amount of work for the same result, or you're doing the same amount of work for half the result. And so I really like the idea of doing fewer deals, but doing them all on your own. So that's the way that I've scaled my portfolio, slow and steady, although it can be done quickly. I mean, I got my first 32 units in 2.5 years, and that was largely in part to forcing appreciation. And of course, we did have quite a bit of market appreciation, which was completely out of my control, but it was never part of the plan. And then significant cash flow also helps. And this is also something that people really saw the value of when interest rates dropped, because if you didn't have significant cash flow, it was really hard to ride through some of these times this last while. And there've been quite a few investors that haven't been able to ride through these times. And so it's really about forcing appreciation, and it's about making sure your properties are, in this market with rates where they're at. I think a property that's cash flow neutral or cash flowing a little bit is perfectly reasonable. But I definitely think doing it on your own, if you have the option, is the way to go, at least for me. So there are many other ways to use other people's money. There's promissory notes, borrowing from friends, family, other investors. There's unsecured lines of credit. And I should bring it back to the prom notes. This has been a topic of large controversy, and for good reason. This is something where if you're a lender, generally, I wouldn't recommend loaning out on a promissory note. You have to, really trust the person you're lending to, because you don't really have a lot to fall back on if they decide not to pay you back. Now, if you're the borrower, perfectly fine to borrow on a promissory note because it's quite safe from your position. But there's a lot of people who take quite a bit of advantage of that and have racked up millions and millions or tens of millions of dollars in promissory note debt, and people don't make enough of a plan as to how they're going to pay that back. So it's very important when you're raising other people's money to have a very clear plan as to how you're planning on paying it back. And so unsecured lines of credit are another way to do that. I definitely recommend people, if there's one takeaway from this event, like one quick go-to for everyone, get a bunch of unsecured lines of credit. I have them at TD, Scotiabank, RBC, Tangerine. I have them on my corporations as well. You can get business lines of credit. I have one for each of my corporations. These are things you don't have to use. And in fact, I'd recommend not using them unless you need them. Treat them as an emergency fund, but get as many of them as possible. Your credit score will drop slightly during the initial applications, but you'll be able to, your score will recover within a few months, and you'll now have access to that debt. And you'll have more available credit, meaning your debt utilization will be lower. And so that's valuable when it comes to maintaining a healthy credit score, and also just having available cash if you do need it. There's also secured loans. You can get first, second position loans. You can borrow from people by just finding private lenders on your own, or you can work through a mortgage broker and oftentimes pay a 1% or more broker fee. You can also do RSP and TFSA loans. So you can borrow from other, people from their RSPs and TFSAs. You can do that through a company called Olympia Trust and other trust companies. You can do vendor take-back mortgages, where you borrow from the person that you're buying the house off of. And then you can do, of course, banks, where we're doing most of my debt is just from banks and credit unions, mostly credit unions these days. Once you don't have T4 income or self-employment income or anything like that anymore, and you're qualifying based on the portfolio itself, credit unions are a really good way to go. And so a novel idea is maybe consider using your own money. And a lot of people don't have lots of that. And that's generally where people just say, well, I'm going to start borrowing other people's money. But if you can be frugal and save up enough for that first deal, and make sure that first deal is value add and has the opportunity to BRRRR and get your money back out of it, you can keep up acquisition momentum without having to borrow large amounts of other people's money or bring on partners. And, we've seen the struggle of people taking on too many partners, and we've now seen a lot of the struggle of people taking on too much private debt. And so, maybe just take a breath, don't scale the portfolio too quickly, and just continue scaling at a reasonable pace over some years, and get your own money back out of your own deals. So if you're successfully BRRRRing properties, you're you're successfully recycling the same down payment funds over and over again. I started with 120 grand. That same 120 grand is what has built my portfolio up to $15 million, 88 units. And I did that just with bank funds. And then I did bring on a bunch of promissory notes over time, but I turned out to be quite a stressor for me, honestly, to have too much promissory note debt, because I always need to have a plan for how I'm going to pay it back. And when the market was going down and interest rates were going up, that became quite a struggle. So I actually ended up selling off two of my buildings. So not a lot, but enough for me to pull out a bunch of cash, pay off prom notes, and just really try to be done with doing too much of that. Yeah, but the goal is recycle your same money over and over. So that 120 grand I started with is what built the portfolio I have today, using mostly banks and credit unions and some private debt for a bridge loan to bridge the gap between, you know, taking on the initial deal and then eventually refinancing it with a traditional lender. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So my first property was 5% down on my duplex. That's me standing in front of my first property in 2016. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of my Instagram account, that's the first photo I posted, because I wasn't really on social media before that, but I was like, well, I'm going to share my real estate journey. And, you know, I just spent years just documenting my journey. I wasn't doing any coaching or anything like that. I just really wanted to share kind of what I've been up to. And, you know, it allowed me to, you know, I definitely recommend everyone do this, because you can really build a lot of connections with people. There's a ton of value in that. So you learn how to be a landlord, you learn how renovations work, and you can live for free. And then start to BRRRR. I'm gonna have to fly through these slides to get through this in a good amount of time, but just start to BRRRR, buy undervalued assets, do strategic renovations, refinance up to 75 or 80% loan to value, depending on the lender you're working with and your financial situation, and then repeat using those same funds to refinance into the next deal. So this is a really basic example of a BRRRR project. So let's say you can buy a property for $400,000. And of course, these numbers are going to be different in every city, but you can definitely find deals that work sort of like this. You know, $400,000, you're putting $80,000 of renovations in, and let's say in that scenario it's worth $600,000 when you're done. You know, this might be a triplex in like a really, in a not too expensive of a market, or maybe a duplex. But you know, you're in for 480 and it's worth 600. But the way the numbers shake out, if you put it into the BRRRR calculator, is that very bottom right number, $6,000. You know, if you are 80% loan to value when you buy the property and 80% loan to value when you refinance it, then that's how the numbers shake out. You end up only being $6,000 out of pocket, and you're ready to take all of your money and reapply it to the next deal. And so these are the types of deals you want to be looking for in a perfect scenario. Of course, oftentimes your out of pocket amount is going to be quite a bit higher, but this is the gold standard. This is the kind of thing you're looking for. And then after your first property, I generally recommend people do that first property using actually the bottom strategy here, which is 5% down and using a purchase plus improvements mortgage. And so 5% down, so your down payment's very low. Purchase plus improvements mortgage allows you to get your refinance money back out. And you can make some very specific decisions about what kind of renovations you're going to do in that scenario. You're ideally going to keep your renovations very minimal, and get that renovation money back out. Now, if you're doing 5% down without a purchase plus improvements mortgage, you're going to definitely want to keep your renovation budget quite low, because you're not going to refinance that money back out. You're already at 95% loan to value, and so you're pretty max already. You're well leveraged, so you generally just want to keep those old windows, you know, hang on to the building the way it is, do some painting and clean up and get the thing rented. But then at the top of the list is your bread and butter deal, 20% down BRRRR using a cash out refinance. The goal there is to focus on a balance of maximizing your after repair value and your rents. And those are the things that are going to allow you to pull as much money out of that deal as possible. And so the go-tos for renovations, it's a little bit blocked on my screen, but I'll do my best. So there's painting, of course. Use the same paint in all your units, discount from the paint supplier. So you can get like a Dulux account and you'll often get like 50% off your paint. Flooring, vinyl plank throughout. I generally use glue down vinyl plank instead of click lock vinyl plank. It's a lot easier to replace just one piece of flooring when you do it with glue down, but they both can be useful. Kitchens and bathrooms, you can use vinyl plank throughout the whole unit. So bathrooms, you can re-enamel the tub and or the tile. You can actually get someone to come out and like spray it with a new white enamel coating. You can actually get an enamel pen for like $10 at Home Depot, and you can touch up bathtubs, you know, if the spots they were chipped and things like that. You can put in a permanent bath mat, which are a bath mat that actually gets glued down to the bottom of the tub, and it prevents the new enamel from getting rubbed away, because it's not quite as durable as the original enamel, but that's a good go-to for re-enameling a tub and tile without having to rip the whole bathroom apart. Laundry, I generally like to do shared coin op when you can, even in a triplex or a fourplex. If it's a duplex, maybe in-suite laundry is probably a good way to go. But I really prefer shared coin op because people are a lot more cognizant of their use of the utilities in that scenario. Unless you have separate water and hydro, then in-suite laundry is perfectly fine. But you know, at scale, I really prefer having a coin op laundry room, just in my experience, and I'm not alone in that. Adding bathrooms and bedrooms when you have the opportunity to. So converting maybe a bachelor unit into a 1-bedroom unit, or splitting a 2-bed unit into multiple units, or a 3-bed unit into multiple units. Generally trying to eliminate a dining room, maybe add a bedroom or a bathroom where that space was, so you can have an open concept kitchen and living room. You can combine the kitchen and living room into one room, and then that way you can now add a bedroom where the dining room might have been. And then take advantage of energy rebates like Enbridge and things like that, where you can get money back for insulating your properties, and all sorts of other efficiencies that you can do. Just got to jump to the next slide there. So just an example of painting cabinets, but we can skip to the next one. It's just a really quick way to put some paint on the cabinets and transform a kitchen. Here's an example of where I added a bathroom. There was just a useless space, and we put a kind of a crappy bathroom in. Honestly, I'd probably do it different. This was years ago, but it's a new bathroom where there was no bathroom, and that definitely adds value to the property, both for the tenants and for the appraiser. Some landscaping in this scenario, just keep it clean and simple. I took everything out and I just put grass. So we did new sod and a new fence in this scenario, and it just made for a nice fenced in backyard. Just keep it simple. Here's an example of changing a layout to make the better use of the space in a bathroom. So you can see the shower stall on the top left, and then we demoed it and put in a new shower that took up the whole wall, so that, you know, made much better use of the space there. And then energy rebates. Here's an example of insulating the attic in one of my triplexes. I used to live in this property actually, and we insulated the attic, and this is one winter versus the next winter. When you insulate the attic, you're less likely to have ice melting on the roof or snow melting on the roof and then refreezing into ice and causing damage. So insulate your attics, and then also vent them. So you just want to make sure that's done properly. Here's an example of reglazing a shower and bathtub. I think we might have done the tile and the tub in this scenario, and there's a permanent bath mat example on the bottom of the tub there. So that was, you know, maybe under $1,000 versus tearing the tub out and starting all over. Here's an 8-plex deal that I did quite recently. So I got a really, really great purchase price on this. I paid it was listed for $750,000. I paid $600,000. It was on the MLS. It sat there. This was maybe a year and a half ago or something now, maybe something like that. Maybe coming up on 2 years ago now, but either way, $600,000 for an 8-plex. It sat on the MLS, and there was a bit of a flood of listings at that time, and so I think people got lost and didn't really see the potential in this deal somehow. But I mean, this sat there for 2 months before I put this offer in for $150,000 under asking, and I ended up putting I think, yeah, renovations $350,000, and then $50,000 of cash for keys. So I was in for $1 million, and it reappraised at 1.75. So that was an equity gain of $750,000. That was definitely one of my best deals. It was a big version of what I was doing with, you know, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, but it's the same thing. And we'll jump to the next slide, and I'll show you how the financing. Actually, I think I left that out. I don't know if I left it out. We'll see. So the backyard in this scenario, this 8-plex, if you look on the right-hand photo, on the bottom right of that photo is the 8-plex. The rest of this lot is just this giant empty space. And someone actually asked a question about this on the Facebook group, so I'll get into that. But basically, there's a bunch of land around this 8-plex that has the potential for development. And I've never done a development. I've never built a building from scratch before. I've generally found a lot of value in just buying existing buildings and renovating them. But in this scenario, I already own the land and I already own the 8-plex, and we've turned all 8 units over and it's cash flowing. And so let's look at building a building behind it. So I worked with a local company that helps with urban planning. So they actually communicate with the city, because I don't feel like learning all the ins and outs of how to do all that paperwork. So I hired a company that helps with it, and we're putting in an application right now to build a 12-plex in behind my 8-plex. So in this scenario, we'd have 20 units on this land. We'd have very little parking, but surprisingly, the City of London is open to this concept of only 0.5 parking spaces per unit. I think that they know that we need housing more than we need parking, and so they're open to the idea based on a pre-application consultation we'd done. And so fingers crossed we get approval for this 12-plex. We're right now trying to push for as many 2-bedroom units in this as possible. And so small versus large apartment buildings is quite a common conversation. You saw that I made that transition in 2020 into larger. And so I've experienced with both, and I don't think one is better than the other. So small 2 to 4 unit, duplex, triplex, 4-plex, they move a lot quicker. Their financing is easier, so you're going to get more like 80% loan to value, upwards of. You're going to get 30-year amortization. You can get lower interest rates because they're residential. They're more liquid if you do decide to sell these buildings. So there's a lot of advantages to this. And they're also just quite a bit more approachable, a little bit less scary to take on. So I generally recommend people start there. I don't think people should jump into large apartment buildings, even if they have a bunch of cash. Start with some smaller ones, get a feel for it. And then the large apartment buildings, 6 units and up, they're crazy capital intensive. So for example, a $2.4 million 12-plex, that would be $600,000 to $720,000 for the down payment. And so very capital intensive, especially if you're doing it without partners. And so that's one of the big downsides of it. Now you have to get very creative in order to have less down. So you can do second position vendor takebacks and all these interesting strategies. You can do CMHC mortgages to get higher loan to value, but generally you still need to close initially without a CMHC mortgage. So you private financing or all these other types of strategies, but they tend to move quite a bit slower, but they do scale well once you've already built your foundation. And so what I have found is that they're a lot lower mental bandwidth. So owning my 24 unit building is a lot less mental bandwidth than owning 12 duplexes. And so I really value that, and I also value that the value of the building is more predictable based on cap rates and net operating income. Whereas when you're dealing with 2 to 4 unit buildings, the value is based a little bit more on comparable sales, which can be a little bit more all over the place. And so I like the larger buildings for that reason. So this is the long-term, the ultimate wealth builder. So it's just about building up your assets under management. Let's say you buy 1 triplex per year. They're 550 to 650 grand each. After 5 years, you'd have 5 triplexes, 15 units, no partners. You'd have a portfolio worth 2.75 to 3.25. Even if you have 0 cash flow, you're going to have mortgage pay down. Let's make a guess, and this is a complete shot in the dark based on maybe just my experience with my portfolio, around $220 per unit per month of mortgage pay down. This is the principal portion of your mortgage payment. So that adds up to $3,300 a month in mortgage pay down. You're going to have maybe portfolio appreciation over the long term. If we're looking at a 10, 20-year period, say 3% per year, that on your portfolio value of 3.25, that would average out to be $8,125 a month in long-term appreciation that you'd be earning. And then that totals up to $11,425 per month, and it continues to compound over time. And so this is the value of building up a lot of assets under management. So some of the stuff I'm currently doing right now, the possible 12-plex development, fingers crossed, we get approval. We're doing and when I say we, it's myself, my property managers, and my construction team. We're doing a major renovation on one of my 8-plexes. We're waiting on permits right now. It's going to be $400,000 or more for that renovation, and that's a complete shot in the dark as to what that cost will be. Honestly, I haven't run the numbers yet. We're doing a bunch of ongoing renovations from recent turnovers. We have had some natural turnovers where people just leave on their own, and we've had a bunch of cash for keys where I pay tenants to move. And we're going to be approaching a bunch more tenants with cash for keys in the spring, because people are a lot more likely to move in the spring than if you approach them in the winter to move. I've found a lot less success during that season. Keeping my social media active, so podcasts, things like this, short form content, etc. It's a bunch of the stuff that's keeping me busy. And then created the multifamily mastermind recently as well, and that's been really great. And I'm preparing my 24-unit apartment building for a refinance. So fingers crossed, I'm going to be refinancing that probably with a credit union for now, but in the long term, I'll probably look at refinancing it with CMHC. And then I'm adding an Airbnb suite to the basement of our house right now. So it's going to work for an Airbnb for now, and then in a year, 2 or 3, whenever we feel like it, we'll take the door off between the units and it'll become the rest of our house. But in the meantime, we don't really need that basement for ourselves, so we may as well. We're hoping to get $2,500 to $3,000 a month for that basement, and figure why not? It gives us an excuse to do some renovations down there when we probably wouldn't otherwise. All right, I flew through that as quick as I could. So yeah, my website, kellanjames.ca. I'm gonna have I'm posting more and more, but right now I have a free real estate calculator for you guys there right now. It's a profit planner. It's basically how to do BRRRR calculations. This is something everyone already knows potentially, but I use this myself all the time. So I think everyone should have a go-to BRRRR calculator. You're analyzing a deal, run the numbers on it, and just make sure that you're understanding how much equity you're building and how much out of pocket you are. And so it's on the bottom, the bar here that Austin put there, and the bottom of our thing in blue. It's kellanjames.ca/rise. It's just a free calculator for you guys. Definitely recommend getting a copy of that. And let's jump into the Q&A.
Awesome, Kellen. Switching the view here. Perfect. We have quite a bit of engagement, so that's good. Let's get started off. Let me see if I can show the questions. You see that there?
Oh, cool. Yeah, fancy.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, I didn't even know you could do that. So where can you find properties that would meet the 50% rental offset rule in today's market? So why don't you explain the 50% offset rule is for people who don't know, and then address the question?
Yeah, so the 50% rule is often used by banks like Scotiabank in order to make sure that the properties are floating themselves in the eyes of the bank. So they're, let's say, zero cash flow in their eyes, but they're not costing you month to month. And so the bank is more likely to continue approving you for mortgages because you're not buying up properties that are losing money in their eyes. And so that's going to be the total gross rents divided by 2. And then you're going to subtract the mortgage payment and the property taxes from that. And historically, they used to subtract the heat or the gas bill from that, but I don't think they have to anymore. And so if that number is 0, then the property floats itself. If it's positive, it actually improves your qualifying ability. And if it's negative, then it's affecting your qualifying ability negatively. Realistically, it's quite difficult to find properties that are meeting this rule. I built a lot of my portfolio on what I call unicorns. They're really hard to find deals that meet these types of rules, but this is the gold standard that we're shooting for. And so where would you find that sort of thing? Probably in smaller markets, maybe in like Chatham, Sarnia. Maybe it's possible to find them in London, although I do think it's going to be quite difficult. They're going to be in like less expensive markets where your mortgages are less and your income is similar. Maybe Sudbury would be doable. Definitely in places like Edmonton, if you head out west, or maybe if you're in Saskatchewan or Eastern Canada. Otherwise, if you have solid job income or self-employment income or things like that, you can use that to help in order to continue qualifying. And so if your properties do end up with a negative rental, like a negative number after you've done that math, you still might be able to continue qualifying anyway, just based on your active income.
Mm-hmm. And just to add on to that, it does get tough if you're starting to BRRRR when you refinance on ARV, because obviously prices are a little bit elevated. Is your refinance? I think it's very interest driven, because the biggest expense portion usually is your mortgage payment. But we'll jump on to the next question here, which markets do you think we should be looking at right now?
So I hesitate to, like, I tend to throw a lot of cities out there because I think there's potential, and like the way to view this is that there's, every strategy can work and every market can work, but not every strategy can work in every market. And so depending on your strategy, if you're looking at BRRRR-ing, I mean, it's really all about forcing appreciation and refinancing. And ideally, those properties also are around cash flow neutral after you've done your refi. And so that tends to be the limiting factor, is it cash flow neutral after your refi? And so that's where you tend to rely on markets that are less expensive. So I think this is like, I do like London. This is where I currently invest. I think St. Thomas is interesting. I think Sudbury is interesting. I think there's a lot of people in Edmonton that are doing a lot of cool stuff. The property values are quite low and the rental income is quite high there. Windsor, definitely still has potential. I wouldn't go to markets that are too small. I'm not personally interested in that because I think the long-term future is a little bit more questionable. But if you're in a market that's got a decent population, the population trend is positive and the population's growing, but not just growing in a way that's where people will actually stay, because you see markets maybe like Regina or something where there's a lot of people moving there, but then there are a lot of people moving out of there too. And it's because they realize they don't want to stay because it's cold. And so, markets that you think will sustain a rise in population over the long term, and just looking for places that have maybe tech work or hospital work, or some of these things that you think that we expect to be around for the long term. I look at, now I hesitate to say this because there's probably people in this market, but Sault Ste. Marie, I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, it's my hometown. And, they tend to be very heavily reliant on the steel plant there. And so that's an example of a market where, let's say that steel plant goes under, that's big problem for that city if that happens. And so I don't like if we have too many eggs in one basket. So, a decent variety of industries in your city would be helpful.
Awesome. Now, I guess the first targeted multifamily question of the day: what is the best way to learn how to underwrite multifamily deals?
So you definitely a lot of times people spend quite a bit of time in spreadsheets, and that's realistically what you have to do. It's also helpful to have people to run it by. So if you can have mentors in your life, fellow investors, people that have experience with this, going through these things and running it by them to see if you're doing it right is a really, that's the way to learn anything, right? Is we need feedback to know if we're doing it right. And so, underwriting a deal, spending a lot of time in spreadsheets, looking at, trying to figure out its current value and its after repair value. And so current value is a little bit tough because a lot of times we're really trying to analyze its potential. And, if you're looking at properties based on a cap rate on the acquisition, it's not really, I don't know, I haven't found it to be particularly helpful. I mean, if you're looking at 12 units and up, it can be useful. But when you're looking at anything under 12 units, cap rates, I don't think are particularly reliable for the initial acquisition. I think they're more helpful for the after repair value. And a lot of times we're looking at stuff that's maybe it's a bad cap rate on the acquisition, but it's because that you're going to add bedrooms here, you're going to add a unit here, you're going to get cash for keys in these units quite quickly, or whatever the potential, you see the plan in place. And so I've bought properties that maybe had definitely lost money month to month on the acquisition, but it was because I had a plan for them, a very clear plan. And so, it's a variety of looking at its current value. So you're going to look at comparable sales, you're going to look at price per unit potentially, and you're going to look at maybe cap rates as well. And then looking at the after repair value, and that's, based on similar things. But if you're in 6 units and up, then you're going to more look at price per unit and cap rates. Comparable sales are going to be a little bit tougher on apartment buildings because they just tend to be so different depending on their location and things like that. So it's really figuring out, like, the gold standard of all this stuff is looking at your BRRRR calculation, and then also looking at your cash flow calculation. Those are the two main calculations you want to do. How much are you going to be out of pocket on this deal? So how much are you leaving in the deal and not getting back out? and trying to keep that number as low as possible so you can keep up your acquisition momentum. And then also looking at how much month to month are you going to be maybe burning on the initial acquisition, and then what is a worst case scenario, a normal case scenario, and a best case scenario, and kind of running those three scenarios for cash flow to see if you're happy with the normal case scenario, or maybe even a little bit of a bad case scenario, and the deal still works, then that tends to be sort of the sweet spot. I mean, ideally, it's going to be a unicorn where you're like, for sure, this is a home run, and definitely try to find those when you can.
So I'm going to actually dig down a little bit deeper into this question as well to expand on it. Before I do so, to your point on acquisitions of cap rate when you buy the property, like just for example, imagine someone's looking at a property in Toronto that's like a 6 unit. Okay. And the net operating income is about 60,000 a year. And let's say it's a 4 cap that you're willing to pay. No one's going to sell a 6plex for 1.5 million in Toronto, right? Like that's just, what world are you in? So you do kind of have to pay on upside. But that being said, how do you determine your level of determine the after repair value? But what are the next steps after that to figure out what your offer price is going to be?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit there. Can you just repeat that last part of the question?
Yeah, so I was going to say, how do you determine your max allowable offer on properties? If you're not looking at cap rates on entry, how are you determining this is the price that I'm comfortable in offering?
I really, when I look back at my acquisitions, there have been very few deals where they weren't an obvious yes. And so I don't really have anything where if I were running the numbers, things are tight. And so I'm looking at, when I look at my after repair value, I'm really being very conservative about it. And I'm looking at, if you're looking at, let's say, 4plexes, I think 4plexes are kind of a sweet spot for a lot of people. They're still in the residential space, and you can still maybe get them with 20% down and things like that. So you're probably going to be looking more at comparable sales in that scenario. If you look at current values right now for 4plexes, and you can look at some of the maybe lower end of those 4plexes and for comparable sales, and that number still works on your BRRRR calculation. And you have some degree of predictability when it comes to getting units turned over and getting the rental income up, and your property is, say, cash flow neutral after the refinance, or even loses $100 a month or something like that. I think having a burn rate is okay when it's reasonable. That's the kind of deal I think that would be like, a baseline type deal for me. Ideally, these properties are, a no-brainer is the goal. As little money out of pocket as possible. This kind of stuff is, when you're looking at 12 units and up or 6 units and up, even, this is often going to be a multi-year process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it's also, it starts to become quite a bit less predictable. So you have to be comfortable to some degree leaving a chunk of money in a deal for quite a while. For example, my 24 unit building, it was over $1 million for the down payment, and I've put a bunch of money into it since. And as frustrating as it is, I haven't refinanced it yet. And so it's been, I think, 2 years. We've turned 12 of the 24 units over, and we're working on more as we speak. Hopefully get a 13th soon. But I've had a lot of money sitting there for a long time. And, I paid in that scenario $152,000 per unit in London. It's quite common to get at least $200,000 per unit. And so, it's not super predictable when it comes to getting turnovers, but if I was okay with, say, getting half of them turned over, and I ran those numbers and I was happy with the amount of money out of pocket that I was, then I would, I'd feel okay about it. People can dive a little further into it and start to look at their cash on cash return, because at the end of the day, your out of pocket number is also going to be, you're going to be looking for a return on that out of pocket money. But I don't really dive that deep into cash on cash return. I think that, the goal is always infinite. But the reality is we're always just looking for as little money left in the deal as possible. And so as little money in the deal as possible with a conservative scenario is what we're looking for.
And just one more last thing on my end under the underwriting side. How do you get comfort in knowing what units you're going to be able to turn over and timeline wise? Like, do you have any assumptions with tenant turnovers? Because that's a big part of multifamily investing.
Yeah. And I think that it's funny because now property managers are like, oh, don't worry about it, you just pay them to leave, or we haven't had cash for keys conversations with them yet. You can't really trust those things, because the reality is they probably have tried to get those tenants out. There's not a lot of people who are just been these days who have been sitting on units that are super under rented and haven't even tried to get turnovers. And it's going to be more and more the case as time goes on. So looking at tenant profile is one of the best ways you can do it. So if they are younger in general, you're more likely to be able to get turnovers. If people are, have been there for, if they're in their 50s and 60s, and they've been there for 20 years, they're less likely to be moving. So tenant profile is one of the number one things you can look at. And then you can have a bit of a conversation with people maybe as you're walking through units, and get a feel for, how likely they are to want to stick around. What I honestly do is just budget quite a bit of cash for keys. So, my formula for cash for keys, if anyone's wondering, is the delta of the, what the unit could rent for versus what it currently rents for. So let's say it could rent for $1,500 a month. Currently it rents for $1,000 a month. 1 to 2 years of that difference. So that would be, in this scenario, 1 year would be $6,000 of opportunity cost, and 2 years would be $12,000. So $12,000 would be a perfectly reasonable amount to pay of cash for keys in order to get that turnover, because you're getting your money back in 2 years. And so in theory, $12,000 times the number, or a number that, using that calculation, you can figure out how much cash for keys you need to budget in order to get more turnovers on the building. And the longer someone's been there, the more that you're probably going to need to be able to pay them to move. And you need to budget for some percentage of people that just won't leave. And so, for example, if there's 15 units that you need a turnover on a building, maybe plan for 5 to 7 of those units turning over for now as a phase one. And then, maybe at some point you can get 10 of those 15, units turned over, but I would plan for maybe 5 of those people living there for the rest of the time you own that building, because it's very possible.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So we'll move on to the next question here. Which credit lines favor investors the most in terms of maximum capital and good rates?
So I wonder if they mean credit unions, probably. I'm going to guess they meant credit unions, but I can touch
either
on both.
That, or maybe this question popped up when you were talking about lines of credits. No.
Yeah. So lines of credit, like, I would get them everywhere. So I wouldn't only pick one anyway, but I have you can get up to, I think, 75,000 or something of unsecured lines of credit with Scotiabank. I actually have more than that, but it's just because of a kind of a glitch in their system over the years. You can actually, kind of a pro tip, you can actually, yes. What's that? Oh, union. Okay, yeah. Oh, credit union. Well, anyway, the pro tip with the lines of credit is that you can get, with Scotiabank, you can get a credit card. Say you have a $20,000 line of credit and you get a $5,000 credit card. You can then cancel that credit card and merge that $5,000 of available credit into your unsecured line of credit and bump it up to, I forget the numbers I used, but you can add that $5,000 onto your unsecured line of credit. So when it comes to credit unions, they are definitely a local thing. So it depends on where you are. I've worked with Libro Credit Union, Main Street Credit Union, Meridian Credit Union. I've had best luck as of recently with Main Street Credit Union. So if they are willing to work in your market, it's definitely worth reaching out. But realistically, you just want to talk with all of them and be ready to spend some time putting together long applications. They do take quite a while, especially the bigger your portfolio. It's oftentimes going to take me almost a whole day to put an application together and put all the paperwork, for the whole portfolio together just to hand it over. And maybe it turns out they aren't willing to give me a good offer, but it's worth a shot. So those are a few that I worked with, but it's going to depend on your Desjardins is another good one. A lot of people, they're a little more widely known. They work more across Ontario at least. So, oh yeah. And then in terms of like rates and things like that, they tend to be quite similar to banks, maybe a little bit higher, sometimes even a little bit lower. They've been lower than banks like Scotiabank I've seen. as of recently. Loan to value is going to be more like 75% instead of 80, and amortization is going to be more like 25 instead of 30-year am.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to an Instagram question. I realize our Instagram isn't linked, so I'm gonna write it down here so everyone can see. Okay, so it is here. It is. Is there a rule of thumb worst and best case scenario? Plus 30% minus 30% in project costs, I guess, for renovations.
Best and worst case scenario for the rule for. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, maybe more like 20%. I mean, it depends. I mean, this really comes down to your ability to estimate renovation costs. So, if you've worked with, an electrician quite often, have that electrician come with you through your, initial inspection. Maybe they can give you a better ballpark and get you a little more accurate on your estimation. So I think, if you're not feeling very confident about the level of your confidence level when it comes to your estimation, then just add more of a budget to it. I'd probably use personally more like 20% for myself. And oftentimes it does go over, even these days. So, and it's mostly because we open up a wall or whatever it is and we decide to do more than we planned on. And it's just because once you've started, sometimes it doesn't make sense to just like not fix a plumbing leak or not replace plumbing when you have a wall opened up, or, you start rewiring a unit and you realize you need to rewire the whole thing instead of just part of it, or, whatever. So, but, the goal with getting your estimation costs accurate is the way to get your estimation costs more accurate is to bring in people that will know those numbers more. So bring your electrician guy in, bring your HVAC guy in, run it by fellow investors to see what their experience is like. Yeah.
Awesome. Kellan, we might go a little bit over time. I was wondering if you have 15 minutes, we can end off at 8:50.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. Okay. We'll go over one more question on IG, then switch back into Facebook. Do you have conversations with tenants before you close the property, maybe after you go firm on the property?
So you're not really supposed to, right? They're not your tenants, but yeah, you kind of can. Like when you're walking through these units, oh, how long have you been here? How's the building been? You get a bit of a feel for, maybe they're like, oh, this place is crappy, I can't wait to get out of here. Or, a lot of times you'll be like, hey, are you kicking me out? You hear quite often. We don't kick anyone out because we can't in Ontario, and even if we wanted to. But that is a little bit of an indication that maybe they're open to getting paid to move. And so, and then there's sometimes people are like, they're like, no, I'm staying here the rest of my life. I've heard that from plenty of people. So just having a bit of a conversation with people as you walk through. It doesn't have to be, hey, are you staying? Are you moving? Or whatever. It's just like, what's your experience been like here? And just kind of sort of have a bit of a conversation with them. And you get a feel for, maybe how open to this kind of stuff they might be based on their personality type and their life situation.
Yeah, good point. And just to add on to this, because I've had experience with this in smaller multifamilies, when I do this, I make sure that it is on the APS, right? Because if you do have a tenant agree, hypothetically, to cash for keys, you're still going to need the current owner, because technically the tenants were under the current owner when you negotiated that, to sign off on it. Sometimes they're a little bit iffy about that, right? So make sure if you plan to go down that route, knows what you're doing, it's all on the APS. Cool. Back to Facebook here. So someone agreed with you. They find it easier with lenders over 6 units. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's actually hit or miss. I guess it really depends on the DSCR and acquisition.
Yeah, so it depends on your portfolio size. It depends on your income situation. So if you have a large portfolio, you might be more likely to get approval for buildings without needing to have active income. It's going to be based oftentimes quite a bit more on the performance of the building itself and your portfolio itself. 6 units is kind of an interesting one because, 6 units itself, you can go to RBC and potentially get 80% loan to value and a 30-year amortization. And, Desjardins would do something quite similar. But Yeah, I would say it's just a different ball game. I wouldn't say it's easier or not. If you have really great job income, like T4 income, you're probably not going to have too much trouble getting approval for mortgages with something like someone like, you know, a bank like Scotia. You know, more and more though, I've actually thought people should consider building a relationship with credit unions a little bit sooner, even while they have active income, because at some point they might not, and then you already built that relationship, and now you're starting to qualify using the portfolio itself. Or maybe you start to have some kind of active business or something where you're doing something else to help, and that can potentially help with qualifying as well.
Perfect. For financing questions, guys, we're going to focus on more of the multi-family non-financing questions at the moment, because otherwise we're going to be here forever. There are a ton of questions. You guys can shoot me a DM if you have any financing questions that I can put you in touch with someone, or I can try my best to help answer them. So we talked about how to figure out max allowable offer. Now, how do you figure out the ARV of a multifamily property? And let's talk not about comps and more so on the income approach.
Yeah. So what if, let's say you're looking at an apartment building. So we're right into it. We're at a 12-unit building or something like that. It's going to be very dependent on the cap rate and the price per unit. Those are going to be your two main things. You know, comparable sales play some role as well, but those comparables are probably going to be based on similar price per unit and cap rate. So you can, you know, you can't often trust the numbers that people are giving you when you're looking at buying a building. So you need to figure out these numbers yourself. So you can ask for copies of as much as real data as possible. So actual utility bills, actual insurance, property tax numbers, put the real numbers in there. And once you have that, you have the income, you can now figure out your net operating income, so just subtract them. And now you can figure out, based on cap rates for your local area, you know, on a, you know, maybe you pick a cap rate range. And so let's say it's in London, and maybe you're looking in Woodfield neighborhood. So maybe your cap rate's between 4.5 and 5.5 or something like that, or 4 and 5.5. And so based on that cap rate, you can figure out and based on the net operating income and that cap rate, you have a bit of an idea of the after repair value. You can actually, when you're looking at apartment buildings, one of the best ways to know its value is to run it by an appraiser. And so you can actually talk with an appraiser before you even buy a building to say, what's it worth now, and what would it be worth if I brought its income up to this and the expenses down to this. And a helpful appraiser will actually you know, give you their estimation as to what these things will be worth, or say, yeah, you're within the right ballpark if you kind of send them your spreadsheet. You know, I've been when I run my profit and loss statements and I get my net operating income, figure out the value of building based on its cap rate and net operating income, it's very accurate a lot of the time. It's quite similar to what an appraiser would have to say, and it's because I know what the appraisers are looking for, I know what the lenders are looking for, and so you can often ask both an appraiser and a lender how they tend to value buildings as well. You know, some lenders may want you to budget for more property management fees or less property management fees, or you know, so you can base it on the lender you're planning on working with, the appraiser you're planning on working with, and figure out the after repair value accordingly.
Awesome. We're going to gun through some of these questions here. What would be the best? You guys like to save your questions to the end, eh? So what would be the best way to do the research on cities to find the best market?
So it's going to be based on your goals again. So if you're looking for a really high cash flow market, you have to already understand that you're probably going to be in a market that's, you know, maybe a little bit smaller or a little bit rougher, or both. So, you know, maybe it's like Chatham, Ontario is a kind of a rougher market, but there are maybe nicer neighborhoods in Chatham, or maybe there's London, Ontario, which is a bit of a bigger market, but then there's rougher neighborhoods within London. And those are some of the neighborhoods I tend to invest in. So like Old East Village, Soho, some of these are a bit rougher. And so you first have to figure out which province you're going to be investing in. And so if you're investing in Canada, and so a lot of people, for most people, it's going to be probably Ontario or Alberta. Eastern Canada, I think, is quite interesting as well. But let's say it's between those two. You know, now you need to figure out which of those markets do you think you're a little bit more bullish on over the long term. We're guessing at the end of the day. We don't know which one's going to go up in value the most over the long term, but you're kind of, at the end of the day, if you're building a long-term portfolio, you want to be investing in a market that you feel confident in over the long term. And so I'm obviously in Ontario, but it's also because it's just where I started. And once I have scales of efficiency, I'm just going to keep scaling with what I'm already doing. Ontario, historically, maybe been a little bit more stable than Alberta, which is a little bit more ups and downs, but you can maybe ride through those ups and downs at the right timing and things could work out better, potentially. You also look at landlord-tenant board rules. So, Alberta, you're going to be able to kick tenants out and up the rents to whatever you want, basically once the lease agreement is up. And so there's a lot more flexibility there. And if you just don't feel like dealing with Ontario's rules, you can do that. There's markets out east that allow you to do that as well. So once you've figured out what province you want to invest in, you start to narrow it down to the city and then the neighborhood. City, again, I would look at population trends. I would look at population in general. So, make sure it's a decent sized city that has a decent amount of, you can look at literally the Wikipedia article for some of these pages, for some of these cities.
That's exactly
but just any research you can, right?
Yeah, Wikipedia is amazing. It gives you the entire history, the breakdown, the schools, the major employers, like everything is on there.
Yeah. And there's and Government of Canada actually provides a lot of good stats on population trends and income and all sorts of these things as well. You can look at crime maps. You can gather all sorts of data. I wouldn't look at crime maps too deeply, but they're worth taking a peek at. Anything downtown is going to have higher crime. Anything with a denser population is going to have higher crime. That's at a bit of a high level, I guess, how I would do some of the research on finding the right market. But then, looking at average deals in those markets, what they cash flow, based on what your goals are with cash flow, and then looking at neighborhoods that have the zoning you want, that allow for the types of multifamily buildings you want to take on, the age of the building that makes you comfortable. Maybe you prefer purpose-built versus, converted dwellings. I tend to have a lot of converted dwellings, which are quirky, but you can add quite a bit of value to them, which is really well suited for BRRRR deals. So it's quite a conversation to have. And then I think it's worth talking with other investors in those markets to hear their experience as well, and which neighborhoods they like to invest in. And, I think that gets you a pretty good start.
Yeah, no, amazing. On there. I guess one important point you mentioned is like, what's your goal ultimately, right? Because if you only have $20,000 to $40,000 saved, you're not investing anywhere close to the GTA or in many major cities. So that's sort of also going to push you in what markets you can and can't invest. Do you use realtors or do you find these off-market properties yourself? Actually, let's talk about finding these deals, these multifamily deals. How do you go about it?
Yeah. And before I do that, if you only have 20 grand, you could probably still do 5% down in a half decent sized market. So 20, 25 grand will actually get you into a decent sized market, with that strategy, and it gets the ball rolling. But yeah, in terms of finding deals, half my portfolio has been on market, half of it's been off market, approximately. When you get into larger multifamily, it's really a networking game. It's quite a bit different than small multifamily. So for me, as of more recently, it's been talking with realtors who tend to have more pocket listings, and things like that when it comes to on market / semi on market. Anything through a realtor is sort of kind of on a market of some sort. When it comes to off market stuff, you can actually literally sit in the driveway of an apartment building, right, and try to get the phone number of the owner from one of the tenants walking into the building. Or you can look at the management company, who generally have a sign posted in the lobby of these buildings, and call that number. You can call, if you're remote, you can call all of the property management companies on Google and see if you can get in touch with a property manager that's willing to have a conversation and maybe incentivize them with some kind of a finder's fee if they connect you with the owner and you end up buying the building. So I've bought buildings like that, apartment buildings, by connecting with property managers and then connecting me with the owner. So that's a really good one. You can actually look at even just rental ads. So if a unit's up for rent, now there's a vacant unit and you have the owner's phone number or the property manager's phone number. So call them up and see if you can get a deal done. They're initially going to be expecting it's a potential tenant calling or an applicant, but you just say, no, I'm a landlord, or I'm an owner, or I'm an investor, and I just wanted to see if I could potentially buy this building privately. Off market's really great because you can actually buy properties for under market value, and you can be completely open and honest with the seller about how you're able to do that because they don't have to pay commission. So right off the bat, you can take 4% off the market value, and it's already a win-win. And off-market sellers, they like the privacy of it. Oftentimes these buildings that really have a lot of value to be added are probably also just pretty run down. So the owners might be a little bit embarrassed. They might be embarrassed about the tenant profile in their buildings as well. So they don't like the idea of necessarily having this public listing where people are walking through their building. So they actually oftentimes prefer to sell these things privately. And that's also the reason why you want to talk to realtors, because realtors are shopping these things out a little bit more privately as well. You don't really see a lot of apartment buildings listed on the MLS, and it's because they tend to transact amongst a group of people, a small list of buyers in each city, really.
Question about your 24 unit. Is it 1 or 2 bedrooms? And to add on to that, how much does bedroom mix actually matter to you?
It matters a lot to me. The 2-bedroom units are just, they rent for so much more. And here, I think 60%, maybe a little bit more, 65% maybe of the 24 units. I don't know why I'm using percentages. It's probably like 15 or 16 of the units have 2 bedrooms in this 24 unit. I forget exactly what it is. And that was a big part of what attracted me to it, because I can get quite a bit more rent for the 2 bedrooms. And so it's not just price per unit when you're looking at these apartment buildings. It's, how many bedrooms are in these units? It's actually one of the first questions I ask when I'm analyzing a deal. How many bedrooms are in these units? Because you can make a pretty quick estimation as to what these units could rent for. So yeah, mostly 2 bedrooms, and that was on purpose.
Awesome. So we're going to switch it up to IG and then hit back Facebook questions. So are you considering buying outside of Ontario due to the landlord-tenant board?
So it's definitely the most annoying part of investing in Ontario. But that being said, the money is often made where the problems are. And so if you know how to solve those problems, that's where you make your money. And I know how to solve a lot of these problems. And so I'm happy to take those problems on and figure it out. It's not the craziest thing to say, I'm going to put 20 grand aside per tenant and know that if needed, we could pay those tenants to move, and there's a good chance people will accept a payment like that. And so if you buy a really great deal, you can often budget for those sorts of things. And so I think that, like, similar to, why not invest in some small town in the States where the cash flow is amazing and whatever? It's because I like this. I feel a little bit more confident about the long-term values of Ontario real estate. And I think that the fact that it's harder to transact in, it lends to some degree to its value. So I think that every market is just like a different board game. So you have a new set of rules, and it's just a different way of winning. There's just a different way to win and new strategies to try in that market. But I think that if you have the tools to make money in a market, it's really about identifying those problems and then finding the solutions, just like any business. List out all of the problems that people have and then figure out what the solutions to those are. And so I am not considering investing outside of Ontario, to be completely clear. I would say half of the reason is because of scales of efficiency. I already have my whole portfolio here and it's working, and I'm going to continue doing what's already working. The other part of the reason is, personally, I prefer to own real estate in Ontario versus other parts of Canada. And some of these smaller markets and things like that in the States, I think that there's a reason the property values are lower. It's because they haven't seen the appreciation that we've seen here. And part of that is going to be supply and demand. Part of that is going to be government and things like that. I think it's very likely that we see in the coming 10 years plus another massive stimulation, that the government prints a bunch of money again and it jacks up the value of buildings. I think it's extremely likely that happens at some point along the lines. It'll be very disappointing for our country, but when it comes to owning assets, you know that it increases their value. So, I mean, if you're going to, you know, if we already know this is going to happen, why not own some assets?
Lots of investors are going belly up. How can you avoid that?
I love that question, and I mean, the list is the list is getting longer. The tide has gone out on quite a few investors at this point. There's a lot of people. I'm not going to name names just because I don't feel like it. But there's a lot of people you guys probably used to follow on Instagram that aren't on Instagram anymore. And there's been lots of bankruptcies. There's been lots of people running into issues, and I think that part of the reason, at least that I haven't run into those issues, is one of the reasons is I had no partners, so that was pretty valuable because I could make all the decisions I needed that were best for my portfolio. Another part of the reason was high cash flow portfolio, so I had a long way for cash flow. I was cash flowing like 17 grand a month on my portfolio, and it dropped down to the negatives in that time. So, you know, with interest rates. So, you know, if I was zero, it would have dropped into the very far negative, and that would have been a big problem. So that's one of the values in high cash flow portfolios. When rates were low, you know, 2%, they better cash flow well. Now that they're like 7% or whatever, you know, your people are looking at, it's okay if they're cash flow neutral or so, or make a little bit of money, or even maybe burn a little bit, as long as you have cash reserves and liquidity. But cash flow was another reason. Not being too high leverage was another big reason. So I didn't have a bunch of super high leverage mortgages. I was generally working with credit unions for the most part. I had some promissory notes. I actually had more than I wanted, which I touched upon earlier. And so I paid a lot of those off by selling a couple of my buildings just to stabilize. I also have had a strong emphasis on turning my units over, because that's what we have to do as investors, is get the income up on our buildings. It's how we add value. And so how can you guys avoid it? Make sure that your properties are, you know, and in this, like I said, with current interest rates, cash flow neutral-ish or positive, ideally. Make sure you're adding value through strategic renovations. Make sure you're buying under market value, so get really great deals to begin with. Try not to get too messy with your partnership structures and things like that. If you can, maybe invest without partners. If you do have partners, just make sure you're on the same page and that they fully trust you, and that you have you have it all documented properly. So if you do need to exit the partnership, you have it structured properly. And Austin could probably talk way more about that stuff. And then, yeah, just don't get too high leverage. Don't borrow too much private debt. Some of the people that are still around that have scaled large portfolios without partners probably have a giant pile of private debt. And I don't recommend going there either, because I think that's where the tide has yet to go out to some degree, unfortunately. So I think, and if you're in that position yourself, just know how difficult it is to unwind large amounts of private debt. It's quite difficult. I know, because I've gone through it myself. And so try not to take too much of it on. If you have a bunch of it, consider selling some buildings, pay some of these loans off, just get back and stabilize, put your ego to the side. You know, maybe your portfolio is half the size, but you can withstand these times.
Mm-hmm. Very good points. How important is structured due diligence and required timeline, so you don't have to go back for extension? And what type of due diligence do you do as well when you put a new multifamily under contract?
Yeah, so I mean, set your timeline. I mean, it depends on what due diligence you're doing. You need to get through the building. You need to have the people you need go through the building. You need your appraiser to get in there as well. And so, you know, have as many showings as you need structured into your APS, so that your plumber can walk through it, your electrician can walk through it, your HVAC guy, your appraiser. You know, you have maybe you want, like in a perfect world, you have enough time on your conditional period to get the financing approved, or at least well on its way and looking promising. So if you're looking at a fourplex or something like that, maybe 10 to 14 days kind of thing. If you're looking at a large apartment building, it could be 3, maybe 4 weeks. I mean, not a lot of people are going to be happy about a conditional period that's that long. A lot of times you can actually do a bunch of your due diligence before your conditional. which is the way I tend to do it historically. And so my conditional periods have always been quite short because oftentimes my offers are firm, actually. And it's because I do my due diligence for a couple of weeks and then I go in firm. So it all depends on your speed and the availability of the people you need to walk through your buildings, and how quick your lawyer and your lender and all these people are to get back to you. But I've definitely made plenty of mistakes. When it came to even my 24-unit apartment building, I walked in and I saw 24 hydrometers, and I was like, this is fantastic. They all have separate panels. They all have separate meters. Yeah, they're fused panels, but I can swap those out. It turned out, I forget if it was 40 or 60 amp, maybe 40, I think, per unit. So 40 amps per unit sucks. So we had to rewire basically everything. Not the units themselves necessarily, which is good. The wiring in the unit's okay, but we had to put new panels in, new meters, and new feeder cables from the panels to all of the units, which was very expensive, like 50 grand or something like that, right? And so, definitely have your electrician walk through. I've probably said that a few times because it's a mistake I've made. So just bring, it's all about who, not how. If you don't know how to do it yourself, bring someone in who does. If you have a fellow investor or mentor that you can have run these things by, that's a huge way to save yourself a ton of money. One good decision can save or make you 20, 50 grand, 100 grand easily. So the bigger you're getting as an investor, the more properties you have, the bigger decisions you're making, the more important it is that you're running it by people who have experience in that already.
And if, let's say, the realtor or the homeowner gives you a pro forma, what type of due diligence are you doing there? If they just give you a bunch of documents, because as you mentioned, I think earlier on, you can't always take them at face value.
Yeah, you basically can't at all. So the hydro cost is this much, the gas is this much. I mean, I might start with those numbers and see if, as my initial, first pass filter. But then once you're in your actual deeper due diligence period, you need to get copies of the actual bills and run the real numbers. Even if they give you the property taxes, call the city and ask for the property taxes. That was actually a mistake, a big mistake. I made a lot of mistakes on this one building, but my 24-unit building, I called the city and said, what is the property tax on this address? And this address has, unfortunately, or confusingly, it has 2 addresses. And they only gave me the property tax for one of those addresses. And I thought it was for the whole building. And so the property taxes were double what I expected, even after I verified it with the city. And it was because the person I called on the line didn't. So that dramatically affected my month-to-month cash flow. So these are all mistakes I've made that I'm definitely just trying to help other people avoid themselves, because they're costly mistakes. I forget if that answers your question.
No, it definitely does. Yeah, for sure. We'll move on to the next one here. How can you check if all the tenants are paying? I guess this goes into due diligence.
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, I don't know if there's a better way to go about this than the way I do it. But you have a clause saying that the tenants are in good standing, and you get documentation from the owner showing the payments, and you hope that they're accurate. I mean, at that point, you maybe talk to your lawyer to make sure that you have something to go back on if it turns out, oh, one of these tenants was 6 months behind and the owner didn't mention that. I mean, I think that's misrepresentation. I think there's a decent chance you could make a case there. So maybe, and Austin, maybe you could add to this, or maybe someone else in the comments could, but I think it's really about saying, hey, the information you're providing is real and accurate. And if it's not, we might come after you for it. So share real information and then do your best to, for tenants paying. I mean, I don't know how much you can't go into their bank account and make sure. So
yeah, I guess it's just like getting your lawyer to make some more bulletproof conditions. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you can get money plus it's going to lead to a turnover, you can sort of look at it as a win. But that's only if you have those conditions set up.
Well, and one side note is, what's interesting is when you inherit tenants, you also inherit arrears. And you want to run this by your lawyer to make sure that you're wording your APS, your agreement of purchase and sale offer letter properly. But if they have a tenant that owes $10,000 because they haven't paid rent in however long, they now should owe you that $10,000. And so I've had that scenario with tenants before, and I inherited a building, and so they owe you. So it's good. Honestly, it's a really good thing if the tenant's in arrears when you take on a building, because you hold some cards in that scenario. You can go after them for the arrears. You can forgive the arrears in exchange for an N11 to get a turnover. So yeah, those things are honestly in Ontario. You kind of want tenants to be behind in rent if they're a unit that you want turned over.
Oh, there I am. I don't know why I just lagged for a second.
No worries.
Oh, we did that one. At this point in your career, how often do you try? I assume that's like, how often do you acquire properties? That's my assumption on this question.
How often do you try to add to your, maybe? Yes. So I've been in a stabilization period for quite a while. I bought a triplex a couple months ago or a few months ago. But that was the only property I think I bought in 2023. There was a decision I made maybe a year and a half ago, or maybe a couple of years ago, and I said, if I get another chunk of money from a refinance or whatever it might be, say it's 100 grand, would I rather put that toward a down payment on another building, or would I rather get, say, 10 turnovers on my buildings? And I would much rather get 10 turnovers. So I decided, let's use that money to put toward cash for keys and potentially renovations. A lot of times these turnovers, you can just paint units and re-rent them or clean them up. And so I've just been in a stabilization period for quite a while, turning units over, getting rents up, adding units. So some units we turned over, we were able to split them into 2 different units. So that adds quite a bit of value to the building. And so when it comes to, further acquisitions, right now, at my point, the point I'm at in my career, my number one goal is lifestyle. And so I've realized during these times, one of the biggest lessons I learned is, the value of peace of mind. And so when rates went up and values, I didn't really care so much about values dropping, but when rates are going up, you're looking at your burn rate, you're looking at whatever, you want to make sure that you can ride through these times. And so now lifestyle being my number one goal, probably going to go in with a little, even less leverage than I was going in at, because I want to really be in this in the long term. I want to own my buildings 20 years from now. And it's so funny because I used to say that 7 years ago. So, I'm getting closer to the 10-year mark already with some of my buildings. So I think that, if we see interest rates drop, we're going to see a frenzy of people refinancing and re-leveraging. And I think that people need to be a little careful because we just learned this lesson. And so if and when those time comes, don't get too crazy with refinances and private debt. And, we just learned this lesson. So I think that's, I'm going to continue with acquisitions, but I'm probably going to be a little less crazy about it. I mean, I in 2021, I bought 51 units. And so I'm not going to do that again that quickly. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, it's funny you say we learned their lesson. There was just I think it was yesterday, there was a property with over 80 offers in Mississauga. So I guess people don't learn their lesson.
Wow. Crazy.
Okay, we have a couple of more questions. I guess it's more of a statement. I wonder how useful ChatGPT 4 would be for a city.
Great question.
Yeah. Probably will be.
I think I would use that for sure. Yeah. I mean, verify the information you get from it, but as a quick rule of thumb or a quick analysis, I would totally, I use it all the time. ChatGPT's
it's awesome.
So useful for so many things.
Yeah. And I guess if you create I bet you ChatGPT create a sort of a chart for you and just have like all those cities laid out with each criteria you're looking for.
Yeah.
Give it a shot and let us know how it goes. How much investment do you need to get started anywhere in Ontario? I guess that's how much money you need to get started in investing.
If it's your first deal, again, I try to get into a place like a duplex with 5% down or a triplex or fourplex with 10% down. You need to move into, or you need to state your intention to CMHC to move into a building. And so if you live in a different city, stating that intention can be a little bit more difficult. Maybe you're going to move to that city and move into a new house. But the narrative needs to be there so the bank understands that's your plan. That's your plan. If you move out a week later, that's fine. There's no, you're not breaking any rules at that point. You decide the house isn't for you and you moved out. You still get to keep that 5% down financing situation. So I would really look for something like that in order to get in with less of your own money. But if you're not planning on doing that, then you're going to be looking at 20% down on whatever market you're looking to invest in. So you just have to run those numbers.
Awesome. 2 more questions here, and then we'll wrap up, guys. I guess this is a comment, insurance cost, LOL. That's when you're talking about overstating expenses, understating. Insurance is always the one that gets understated.
Yeah. They're like, I only pay $2,000 a month. You're like,
Okay, here, IG question. Any tips for finding high quality tenants? Anything you do in your screening process that makes a big difference?
Yeah, so I don't do this stuff anymore. Honestly, one of the biggest things that added value for me was hiring leasing agents. So friends of mine own Tailored Rentals in London. If you're in London, Tailored Rentals is awesome. Justin and Lara, they're fantastic. They did a better job than I ever did at screening tenants. But pulling their credit score, making sure they're a good fit for the unit. Just a quick note, I tend to really avoid 3 bedrooms and up. I try to avoid buying buildings with 3 units and up. And if I do, I try to convert them to, maybe a 2-bed and a bachelor or things like that. It's hard to find quality tenants for 3-bedroom units and up. End up with just too many people in the unit causing too many issues potentially. So really try to stick with 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. And then your screening process is going to be quite a bit easier. Actually meet these tenants, get a feel for them when you're actually chatting with them, make sure their income is, I don't know what, at least double their, rent, but ideally more. It's getting harder and harder these days. The numbers used to be a lot more, they had a lot more buffer built into them, but rents have gone up so much and income hasn't. So, if they have a dog, you can consider asking them to bring the dog to the showing, or maybe even send you a photo or a video or something like that. You're allowed to say we don't allow pets, but if they end up getting a pet, you're not allowed kicking them out for that reason. So you need to do that screening initially. My friends Justin and Lara at Taylor Rentals, they're actually making a whole course on tenant screening. So I would keep an eye out for that. I think it'd be really great. I actually have a section from them in my multifamily mastery course, all about tenant screening as well. But I stopped doing that stuff myself a long time ago. I didn't do a very good job with it. I think the biggest reason I didn't do a good job with it, I wasn't very patient. And so the number 1 tip is just be patient and be willing to take vacancy. Yeah, because I always knew I was like, this is not going to be a good tenant, but I don't want to leave the unit vacant for another month. And they were always the problem. So sometimes you can use your gut more than you think.
And to echo that, I think being patient is extremely important. Yes, vacancy rates are low, but that being said, in a lot of cities, there's to your rental unit. I think all of the points you said makes a lot of sense. Sort of it depends on the market you're investing in as well. So understand that. Like when I invest in Sudbury, I think I held my criteria way too high. I was waiting for someone with 700 credit score minimum, and I realized, like, you know what, like I'm going to be waiting forever. There's not very often you find people with that. So I think you sort of have to adjust your expectations. One thing I've learned as well is that always monitor who your competition is in the manager told me it was reasonable. Go online and I see units much better than roughly around the same price, or sitting for roughly around the same price. And it's just like acknowledging it's like, okay, if a good tenant comes along, they're probably going to take that unit over mine. So I think monitoring competition is pretty understated in the current market too.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions. I think I said 2. Oh, no, the questions keep on coming in. All right, let's try to blaze through this. What has been the biggest bottleneck? Actually, Kellan, are you still okay? Or I just want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Cool.
I'm happy to help.
Okay. What has been the biggest bottleneck in your journey, and what are your thoughts investing in the States with tenant-friendly rules?
in the States with tenant. I mean, if honestly, like if people are looking for tenant friendly, you know, situations, you could look at Alberta, you could look at Eastern Canada. These things are quite similar. You don't necessarily have to go out of country. I think that, again, you can make money in any market with any strategy. So but you can't make, yeah, I already said that, but you can make money in the States using different strategies if you'd like. There's a million different markets. There's a million different strategies, and you can apply those things in the States. And it'd probably have to be a little bit more of a specific question if I could really help there. But when it comes to the biggest bottleneck in my journey, capital is always a big one. It wasn't really my biggest bottleneck, though, to be honest, because my deals were good. So I was always able to pull most of my money back out or more. Biggest bottleneck, maybe stress tolerance. It's probably one of the biggest bottlenecks. Like, you know, I think that, you know, it's part of the reason I was able to scale relatively quick, because I actually I built quite thick skin in this game, and I entered into this space of real estate investing with pretty thick skin to begin with. A lot of the tenant issues that really caused people to lose sleep at night didn't really bother me quite as much. So I was built for it a little bit more. Although if that's whatever your bottleneck is, bring someone in. Like maybe a property manager is now there managing your tenants. Now that's no longer your bottleneck because the tenants aren't causing you stress. I think it's really figure out what your bottleneck is and then just look for the solution to that. But I can't even really think of what a good bottleneck was for me, other than just like, you know, opportunity overload and just trying to figure out like how to maintain focus and manage stress during significant times of scale, because there's a lot to think about. Every time I remember the first 2, 3 properties, 4 properties, it felt like I was living a new life for each property I bought. And so that's not for everyone, but I actually kind of enjoyed that. But you tend to burn out. I know I burnt out I forget what year it was, but I burnt out. I went on a social media blackout for a year. And I was just comparing myself too much with other people, even with everything I felt like I was doing quite well. And I'm sure there was plenty of people comparing themselves with my journey, and I was doing the same thing. So, you know, I think be really cognizant of the people that you're following, the people you're learning from, and you'll be a lot more likely to avoid burnout if you're focusing on your own journey instead of trying to, you know, accomplish the goals that other people have for themselves, and they're not your goals.
Very good point. And I think relatable to a lot of people, especially newer investors coming in now, because it's much hard. Reality is it's harder to get started today than it was when we got started. Right. And this is why community is, I think people are really starving for community these days. I think that good quality community is really important. You know, you guys have Rise, which is awesome. But it's really about being around people who understand what you're going through and can relate, and you can be a little more realistic about the people the people that are surrounding you, and the average of the 5 people around you. I'm going to be doing a lot more community stuff. You know, I have my mastermind. I'm going to do a free community soon. So definitely keep an eye out, because I think that's something that people are really starving for. Awesome. Last question here, actually. When you are acquiring new properties, do you always put 20% down? And let's assume residential for the most part.
Yeah. So at this point, I have to do 25% down on everything at least, because that's what the minimum requirement is for credit unions. But yeah, for the first 10 properties, for properties 2 to 10, it was 20% down on everything. You know, I bought a property recently with a vendor take-back mortgage, so it was only 10% down because the seller held the rest of the mortgage. And so it was only, in that scenario, it was $40,000 out of pocket for a triplex. And so vendor take-backs are a way that you can definitely get into properties with less than 20% down. And of course, you can borrow money and do these types of things. But at the end of the day, yeah, when it comes to traditional financing and banks and stuff like that, 20 to 25% down is typically the minimum.
Perfect. You know what? There was one more question that came in on Instagram that I just saw. I don't want to leave them hanging.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, someone asked who was the good property management in London. Why don't you drop it in the Facebook group, Kellan, after we jump off of this live so people can see it on there too?
Yeah. Yeah. So so there's so there are. It's definitely difficult to find good property management companies. I've been very happy with the people I work with. So there's a company in London called Bloom. They've been really great for me. And I know that and I say that because I know that a lot of people really struggle to find good property management companies. So if you guys do reach out to them, feel free to mention my name. They've been really great for me. Yeah. What's that, sorry?
Which was the leasing company again?
The leasing company is Tailored Rentals, and they're good friends of mine, and like I said, they're fantastic. So I think that's a really good option for people who are self-managing but don't want to do the tenant screening and placement part of things. So yeah, Tailored Rentals, they're awesome.
Oh, sorry. There it is. On Instagram, how much time does it take to find a multi-family deal?
Well, I showed my journey of like how many buildings I bought per year. So, you know, maybe only 2 to 3 properties per year or something like that, I think it was for me. So, you know, every 4 to 6 months, you know, you really don't have to find that many. You don't have to find a whole list of deals. You just have to find one good deal every once in a while. So I would say, yeah, every 4 to 6 months is a perfectly reasonable rate to buy. You know, maybe every 12 months, maybe every 24 months, and that's fine. If you buy one property every year or two, you're going to be doing just fine over the long term.
Awesome. And that wraps up today's multifamily Q&A. Kellan, really appreciate you jumping on. I know we went over time, but I'm sure the anything else you want to leave off with?
I think you cut out there, but yeah, no, hey, I appreciate it, guys. Hopefully this was helpful. You got my website there on the bottom. There's a free calculator you guys can have. Again, this is it's you know, when you're looking to buy a BRRRR deal, it's all about running those BRRRR numbers, and so that's what that calculator is for. But you know, anyone that grabs that calculator, I'll be sending you other good free stuff soon. And like I said, the community and things like that. So definitely follow along on my Instagram, and lots of good free information on there.
Thank you to everyone who has tuned in today's first monthly Q&A, again with our multifamily expert, Kellan James. As Kellan mentioned, his website is down below for the free BRRRR calculator. Would love to hear your guys' feedback as well, so make sure to shoot me an Instagram DM on ways to improve this going forward as well. Again, this is sort of our first go. Had a little bit of technical difficulty. So glad you guys all enjoyed. Until next time, everyone, invest smarter and live better. Take care, all. Appreciate it, Kellan.